military, and everything else is going to be great. Second, it's just not true, Mark, that anybody thinks all you need to do is take care of...
I'm sorry, then why wasn't the occupation... I mean, explain to people here why the occupation went the way it did. Why were there 5 weeks of uncontrolled looting that absolutely destroyed the city of Baghdad, destroyed any notion of personal security?
I don't make any excuses for the looting.
But why did it... It's not a question of excuses. The question is, how did it relate to the planning of the war? I mean, David, I thought, gave a fairly plausible explanation, which is people were in love with the notion of high-tech military, shock and awe, revolution in military affairs, whatever you'd like to call it, and they oversold it not only to the American people, but to themselves. And, you know, you've been in the Defense Department. You're very well schooled in these issues. People here are wondering, how did we get into this situation? You know, it's not enough to say they didn't plan for the occupation. They didn't plan for the peace, which we hear again and again. How? Okay. There are a lot of smart people.
Okay, let me answer. Okay. The idea was that the military was going to get rid of the government of Saddam Hussein, all right? That happened quicker, and if I might say, more cakewalky than we ever expected, all right? That was an amazing, amazing military feat, all right? Now, after that time, they did have the looting there, which I do not understand in the least. So I'm not going to get into that in the sense of defending it one bit. I think it was inexcusable that troops were around there. I think it was, in retrospect, a grave mistake to size the force on the basis of taking out the government of Saddam Hussein rather than sizing the force on occupying the country in a quasi-competent way. But last point to make is that no one ever said that democracy is going to spring on April 11th after we get rid of Saddam Hussein April 9th. And so don't characterize that. You have a good argument, Mark.
No,
don't oversell it.
But this is a war that's getting worse. We don't even have to talk about democracy.
No. But there is one thing. That there is a chance now in the New Yorker Festival 4 years from now, there is a chance now that Iraq, without Saddam Hussein, could be on the model of a Jordan, on the model of a Morocco, on the model even better than that. There is a chance of that. Whereas if Saddam Hussein was in power, waiting for his two sons, those ace sons of his, that were both really, really deranged individuals, then take over, there was no chance of that. So are you saying, what I'm saying right now is that there is a chance for a decent life for Iraqis. I can't guarantee it, but I can guarantee that before we got rid of that government, there was absolutely no chance for a decent life of Iraqis.
Can I ask you this?
Sure.
The word cakewalk has come up, and I should explain that Ken Adelman wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about a year before the war, I think, saying the military victory would be a cakewalk.
The overthrow of Saddam Hussein.
And on April 12th, 2003, 3 days after the fall of Baghdad, you wrote a sort of a follow-up called Cakewalk Revisited, in which you said, essentially, I was right. And you also...
I said, no, that's not fair either. Let's get it right.
I read it.
Yeah, right. Well, then you should look at the last half of it, all right? We got some things right, we did not get other... I got some things right, I did not get other three. So don't characterize
well, let me ask you this.
Falsely.
You wrote, my confidence 14 months ago, back in 2002, sprang from having worked for Don Rumsfeld 3 times, knowing he would fashion a most creative and detailed war plan, and from knowing Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz well for many years. My question is, given everything that's happened since, has your judgment of their judgment changed?
On what I was writing about, the answer is no, on the overthrow of Saddam Hussein.
What about what's happened since then?
On the follow-up to that, I think there were severe mistakes, as I said. And I think one of them was the looting, and I think as Mark is absolutely right on that. I think the dismissing of the army, that was right. And that was an error, and, you know, should be criticized on that. So
yes,
I think there are these faults.
Go ahead, Catherine.
I think when we think about Iraq, we can't just think about Iraq itself. None of us can look into the future and say in 4 years will things be better or worse. I tend to think they'll be worse, but I'm a kind of pessimistic person, maybe. So maybe that's just me. But I think we can all agree that the invasion of Iraq, as it actually happened in the real world as opposed to in the mind of Paul Wolfowitz, who, remember, I have to put this in, thought it would cost $2 billion. And I think he was off by a considerable magnitude there. I think we have to ask, okay, look at the Muslim world. Do they like us more or do they like us less? I think they like us less. Look at the rest of the world, the non-Muslim world. Are they thinking, isn't it wonderful to have America unilaterally bashing about? No, I don't think they think that. You know, and in the debates, there were certain remarks made about Poland, our noble ally. Well, even I mean, Poland, great country, but even they're planning to pull back. I mean, have we, by taking this unilateral action, which did not have to, I mean, I kept thinking in the whole build-up to war, what is the rush? Where is the fire? You know, it was like all of a sudden this had to be right away. We couldn't wait one more minute. And anyone who thought we should wait one more minute and try to get more people and just go a few more rounds at the UN or wherever, or just see if there was some alternative to war, or just wait until we got a little more information, anyone who thought that was practically a traitor. And certainly didn't get a lot of room in the media to express this point of view. Well, I still don't understand why it was that this had to be done right then. And I think that the whole way in which we went to war has alienated most people in the world, who were against us from the beginning, I might add. And so the whole idea that America, just because we're so fabulous and have these great values and also happen to be the only remaining superpower, can just change the world in our own way and everyone is going to be grateful, is wrong, even if we do have the best values.
But you yourself have some very strongly held values. Feminism is one.
Yes.
And just because I've thrown a hard one at Ken, I can't spare the rest of you. This is a different war, but in a sense, we're talking about the administration's foreign policy. Before the war in Afghanistan began, you wrote in The Nation, bombing Afghanistan to fight terrorism is to punish not the Taliban, but the victims of the Taliban, the people we should be supporting. Did you have any alternative to offer, especially the women in Afghanistan, other than the overthrow of the Taliban? Would they have been better off under the Taliban, feeling the solidarity of feminists in the West than they are now?
Of course women were not well off under the Taliban, but you know, this is one of these neocon sleight of hands that drive me so wild.
Watch it, George.
Sorry, I mean, no, but...
I'm just the moderator.
Okay.
George has come over to our side all of a sudden. We welcome you, George.
Well, I'm not going to let him go. I have to have him on my side.
He's ours. He's ours. He's deranged from now on.
Well,
we'll pull him back.
everyone wants George on their side. But you know what is so infuriating about the way that feminism is now, you would think that we are invading all these countries to rescue women. This is not true. In fact, the women's movement in America was squawking about the Taliban ever since it got in there, and it was squawking about the mujahideen that our government supported to the tune of more billions of dollars than we ever spent on anything else. While that was all happening, I mean, so that, you know, to sort of say, oh, the Taliban, women, American feminists didn't care about the Taliban. It's the Bush administration that cares about feminism. This is insane. This is crazy.
Go ahead. You know, I think it really, it is not only not insane, it is actually one of these strange things that has happened that is true. And you have to deal with the sort of the world transforming impact of events like 9/11. I mean, that one of the truths of history is that things remain stable for a long time, but another truth is things do change, and sometimes they change. They change in very radical ways. Like if we look back on our own lives, we all know that the story of our own life has been you look backward and you see abrupt reverses, sudden changes of mind, dramatic experiences, and then you say, now what do I look now? If I look the other way and look forward, what do I predict? Oh, things will continue more or less as they have. That's the one thing that isn't true. Now, to the extent that there's a conspiratorial element to neoconservatism, I mean, the godfather, the intellectual godfather of so much of what has happened in the Middle East is Bernard Lewis, a very distinguished historian, published in the New Yorker. Bernard Lewis, if you ask him, what is the #1 problem in the Middle East? What is the #1 thing that you have to fix in order to make it stable and not a threat to the rest of the world? The status of women. And that you have to understand that there are moments where people don't want to hear what you have to say because they're not thinking about your problem. Now, because the Middle East, the internal governance of the Middle East was unimportant. After 9/11, it is important. And so people that, and then the people, the most hawkish, began turning to Bernard Lewis and saying, what's the key? What's the key? And he made this point. And I think it has to be taken seriously. Nor, I think, can you say, but just to stand up for the Bush administration, that an administration where I would suspect probably obviously a very large number, and maybe if you were to count heads in the innermost councils, a majority of the innermost advisors of the president are women. I think they've got a fair track record on these points. One last sentence. I just want to sort of hammer this point home because I know we're going, just before we leave this future of neoconservatism issue, that any group of people, when they have responsibility, are going to make mistakes. And those mistakes are going to be, and no one will say that people have not made an awful lot of mistakes, and we can detail them, and they have been detailed. But the central argument about American foreign policy that defined neoconservatism was the argument, it goes back to the Soviet days, does the internal behavior of states matter? Do we care only about their external actions, or do we care about their internal character? This goes back to the argument over whether President Ford should have received Alexander Solzhenitsyn at the White House. And the people who were then emerging as neo said he should. And Henry Kissinger said, of course, vetoed it, because what mattered was the state-to-state relations only. And I think it is this idea that is obsolete. And although, many individual neoconservatives will suffer black marks on their careers, and perhaps they should, and many people will have said things that they will have to unsay, and many people will want to correct their own records and learn from them. I think that the lesson we take from Iraq is the central neoconservative idea is more true than ever. That it is because it is more true than ever that we have to be concerned about what goes on inside Middle Eastern societies.
David, speaking of correcting one's own mistakes,
the list is so long for me, I don't know where I'd begin.
Well, we'll begin. Were these mistakes inherent in neoconservatism, as opposed to inexplicable incidents of incompetence here and there? And you wrote after the invasion in your most recent book, "The pessimists are quivering because the remnants of the Ba'ath Party have launched a guerrilla war." You wrote, "Post-Saddam has emerged from more than 3 decades of totalitarian rule. Should anyone have been surprised that it took the United States a few weeks to get the lights working?" This is a sort of a dismissive attitude toward criticism, and I'm wondering if you now think that this attitude is part of what has gone wrong in Iraq, an inability to take in dissonant information and to rethink and recalibrate the response.
Yeah. I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think one of the things that happened was the argument inside Washington, which is a little different from the argument inside the country over Iraq, that was very much an argument among different kinds of conservatives. And the left really was not heard. It went into abeyance. So you had people who were very concerned with state-to-state relations with traditional Arab states, and people who wanted a policy focused on the internal governance of Arab states. And they got really angry at each other. And they became, I think, increasingly impatient with each other's arguments. And I think some of that impatience you hear there, I mean, that is directed very much at a lot of the permanent government. I don't know, were the mistakes inherent? I think maybe the mistakes were inherent. If you're going to trace them to anything, I think I'm going to trace them to the Florida recount in this way. The president came into office with a very weak mandate. And the way he chose to deal with that, it's a strategic problem politically. How do you deal with that? And there are a couple of choices. And I'm not going to say, and you never know in advance which is going to work. He chose to deal with it by refusing to acknowledge the problem, by governing as if it wasn't a problem and hoping that that would make it true. 9/11 gave him his mandate. But I think there was a lot of institutional conservatism in the administration where they were not prepared to say, you know what? We have the country behind, we don't have to worry about that anymore. We can now take big risks and make big requests. And, this is a moment to bring some Democrats into the administration, to broaden the base. And there are a lot of political reasons why that didn't happen. And maybe that wouldn't have worked either. I don't know. So I'm not going to say that people, I'm so smart. But maybe that wouldn't have worked either. But that was one thing you could have done. And then the president, give the Democrats something they want, a surtax on high incomes. That always pleases them. Gas tax.
That's the next debate, I think.
Make people pay something. But sort of refound this and then do it in a big way. And I think the thing that, I mean, the irony of all of this